For the Climate Discussion Nexus, I'm John Robson, with the latest readout video from our free Wednesday Wake Up email newsletter, and thanks to viewers in Poland for making it number 23 on our all-time list of views by jurisdiction. I was actually in Warsaw Airport last November, which doesn't constitute visiting your country, but I did discover that you think that W and Z by themselves are words, so you'll understand why I don't try to say thank you, even though, to be fair, it only has one Z, no W's, and two E's with cedillas. Nor will I try to say anything in Chinese, although our first item is yet again the weird Western leftist, including climate zealot, infatuation with Xi Jinping's tyrannical regime and a totalitarian ideology bent on conquering us. But don't worry, our chattering classes have decided to ignore it. For instance, The Economist breezily says, quote, "Don't fret over China's new climate targets," end quote, which are notably less onerous and economy crippling than, say, those of our own Western governments. The same governments that, with the partial exception of the one in Washington, are also weirdly willing to embed Chinese technology in their key cyber systems, including for green reasons. Like that of South Korea, which just had an exploding lithium battery and resulting massive scary fire, which is something we do worry about, and they don't seem to. This one shut down a data center, and with it, hundreds of government systems. Now, despite online rumors, there seems to be no evidence that the PRC was involved in manufacturing these particular exploding batteries. But Chinese-made batteries are in wide use in the West, as is Chinese-made telecommunications equipment, often with perfectly innocent hidden kill switches. But there's nothing to see here, folks, and anyway, if there were, the smoke would be too thick for us to see it. Meanwhile, back in the West, Adam Radwanski, who is apparently a policy columnist and feature writer with the Globe and Stale, writes, quote, "An inherited policy likely to be at the heart of Prime Minister Mark Carney's new climate competitiveness strategy is in a state of severe disrepair," end quote. But actually, the industrial carbon tax of which he speaks, far from being in disrepair, is functioning at full throttle, which is why people hate it. Now, how Carney plans to respond will, according to Radwanski, quote, "go a long way towards establishing not only Mr. Carney's environmental credibility, but the viability of his intended grand bargain with the country's fossil fuel industry and the provinces that are home to it," end quote. Unfortunately, there is no such bargain, of course, unless you count, quote, "you keep paying it and we keep punishing you," end quote, as the deal of the century. As for Carney's end of the supposed bargain, Parliament, under his direction, just voted to retain the oil and gas emissions cap while subsidies pour into failed alternatives. Oh, and by the way, the bureaucracy continues to insist that that oil and gas cap will have, quote, "very minimal impact," quote, on the energy industry, but a massive impact on emissions, which makes no sense, but they would say it, wouldn't they? Carney, meanwhile, in climate grandee style, continues to jet around the world pronouncing on the evils of carbon emissions while fleeing the mundane business of, producing a budget. For instance, with Canada's fiscal situation in peril and the world on fire, quote, "Prime Minister Carney meets with Prime Minister of Iceland Kristrún Frostadóttir on the margins of the Global Progress Action Summit in London," end quote, because, among other things, quote, "Canada is home to the largest Icelandic community outside Iceland," end quote. And so they had to talk Arctic and NATO and, quote, "opportunities to deepen security and economic cooperation," end quote, and, Ukraine and whatever. As when Carney met with Anthony Albanese of Australia, and, quote, "they also discussed innovative solutions to fast-track affordable housing construction in their respective countries," end quote. You can't do that by phone, you see, and they apparently can't do it at all. And now, we interrupt the program for a word from our sponsor, which as always is you. We haven't asked for a while. I don't like doing it. You don't like hearing it. But these videos don't make themselves. We don't have big fancy budgets. We film here in my study or downstairs in my living room, and the only reason we can do it at all is because of contributions from people like you. So please, if you haven't already, make a pledge, one time or monthly, so we can get back to doing what we love best, which is this. Meanwhile, on her Substack, historian Tammy Nemeth writes about the Canadian Prime Minister's obsession with climate competitiveness, exactly the sort of sententiously sonorous nonsense that somehow passes for deep thought in places like Davos. And she tries to imagine what might conceivably appear in the long-delayed federal budget that is supposedly going to be presented on November 4th. Unfortunately, from an enhanced industrial carbon tax to enhanced clean fuel standards to methane emissions performance standards, it all amounts to more intervention on the notion that gutting the conventional energy industry at the heart of our economy will somehow cause a massive surge in productivity and prosperity because it sounds good as polysyllabic symbol manipulation. Alas, no sign of enhancing our actual competitiveness in tried and true ways like lowering and simplifying taxes, cutting regulations, and getting energy costs down. The sort of things that actually might be worth visiting foreign leaders to tell them about. In the newsletter, we also complain that Inside Climate News is excited that, quote, the Philippines has designated more than 200 square miles of its coastal waters as a national protected area to safeguard some of the world's most climate-resilient coral reefs, end quote. Philippine dudes, if you're worried about climate and coral, wouldn't it make sense to safeguard the least resilient? Not the ones that actually like warmth, the ones that flourish in the tropics, not temperate or polar zones, and evolved in a warmer world because they don't need help in the face of warmth? Oh wait, that's pretty much all corals, isn't it? After all, Newfoundland isn't exactly a coral paradise. We then note, finally, actual progress on a real environmental problem. The New York Times celebrates, and we do too, the remarkable news that, quote, early Sunday morning, spectators jostled for a glimpse of the Chicago River to witness something that hadn't happened there in nearly a century. People were swimming in it, end quote. And not because they were tired of life. Instead, quote, the last time that Chicago sanctioned a group swim in the river was 1927, a tradition thwarted by the loads of industrial and human waste that were routinely dumped in the water, end quote. So yes, pollution is bad, and it matters, and yes, we can do remarkable things about it. Provided we're not hallucinating that plant food is the equivalent of industrial waste and excrement, as so many are, and provided we're not diverting so much time, money, and effort to stopping the greening of the planet instead of the browning of the water. Oh, and slower, lower, weaker, apart. Evidently, the president of World Athletics says we have to hold Olympic marathons in the fall or something because, quote, the recent World Athletics Championships in Tokyo were significantly impacted by extreme heat and high humidity, with temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius and feeling closer to 40 degrees Celsius, end quote. Right. Exceeding 30 degrees Celsius. The very iron girders in buildings melt, right? Well, no, because that's actually 86 degrees Fahrenheit. As for it feeling closer to 40 degrees Celsius, what do those words even mean? Other than that, we're all going to die, that is. Meanwhile, on the hypocrisy front, Scientific American takes a quick break from peddling climate doom to invite the special people to, quote, join us, 2026 solar eclipse in Iceland, fire, ice, and totality with Andrea Thompson, end quote. And not for the first time, we wondered, how do you get to Iceland if not by airplane? So we clicked Learn More, and sure enough, it all starts, quote, upon arrival at Keflavik International Airport, end quote, and not by longboat, you, quote, transfer to vibrant Reykjavik, end quote. Vibrant being a word employed to praise foreign cultures when nothing very specific comes to mind. But then you spew carbon to see sustainable modern design before experiencing other climate-virtuous attractions. And now we gloat, because in the wake of Michael Mann's humiliating slapdown for deceit in his slap lawsuit against Mark Stein and Rand Simberg, we wondered in March, quote, what does the University of Pennsylvania think, which recently made him their first ever vice provost for climate science as a globally renowned scholar of climate science, who has been named one of the world's most influential people in climate policy, one of the 10 most influential earth scientists, one of the top influencers in sustainability, and one of 50 scientists who are changing the way we see the world. What indeed do they think of his public offer of $1 million to a Supreme Court justice to step down, end quote? Well, now we sort of know. Mann has just resigned that vice provost post in order to be free to use abusive partisan language, and worse, like calling Charlie Kirk, quote, head of Trump's Hitler Youth, end quote. We say step down, but he might have been pushed out, though we doubt it because he's employed by people too cowardly to keep or oust this repulsive figure. And then we reach for a water glass, because a headline on a Canadian press item in CTV News gasps, quote, Canada's exceptional drought hints at future climate, need for action, experts, end quote. Ah yes, experts. Normally they say experts say, but here apparently dry mouth stopped them partway through. Pity it wasn't thought instead. Because, quote, what has stood out about this year is just how widespread these drought conditions have become, said John Pomeroy, one of Canada's leading hydrologists. The only other year in recent memory when drought was so widespread was 2023, he said. It's a coast-to-coast-to-coast drought, so that's quite exceptional, said Pomeroy. No, it happened in 2 of the last 3 years. Still, computer models see a Mad Max future, unless we get a wet summer when, well, here comes the flood. And this week in our Have It Both Ways series, which is on plants and methane emissions, we refrain from yucking it up over the way climate science declares one thing one day and the opposite the next, even though it is what happened. Because we think that this episode is actually more an illustration of the proper workings of science, where an error is quickly and publicly corrected, leaving journalists in the dust. See, a 2006 study in Nature said that lovely green plants are actually hideous emitters of methane, a supposedly horrible greenhouse gas. And it surprised scientists because the conventional view is that plants only release methane when they die and decompose. And if it were true, it would be quite the conundrum for the Greens, who would have to add plants and trees to the list of things they want banned to save nature. And of course, the media cranked up the usual scare stories that were done for. Until another paper that came out a year later saying, no. The 2006 paper used flawed experimental techniques and got rubbish measurements, and plants are not emitting methane. Well, so far so good. Science is uncertain, and this year's results may be toppled next year. The problem is the journalists didn't take it back. And speaking of scientific uncertainty, a new study in Nature, hat tip to what's up with that, helps to resolve a puzzle that we didn't even know existed because the people whose job it is to tell us about it somehow didn't get around to it. The problem is this. The climate models say that the Greenland ice sheet is disintegrating partly because every year, when bare ice forms around the edges, it melts in the summer sun and all the water flows immediately into the oceans. But the modelers and the insiders knew that there was too little real-world water going into the oceans to sustain this modeling. So finally, a group of scientists turned off their computers and went to Greenland to see what was happening. What a bunch of weirdos, huh? Still, what they found shouldn't have surprised anyone who ever looked after a backyard hockey rink in the winter, which, if you're Canadian, is a lot of people, though I realize there are places it's not so frequent. So, in case you're not a Canadian, the deal is that bare ice doesn't just immediately run off if daytime temperatures get above zero. Sometimes it becomes a puddle and sits there and then refreezes overnight. And for this very same reason, some 9 to 15% of the annual runoff from the Greenland ice sheet that the models predict runs not off. So it's Greenland 1, model 0. Wretched, isn't it? And finally we crack up because the CO2science.org archive reports on Eucalyptus miniata kun ex shower, an Australian tree whose common name sounds like a Simpsons phone prank, Darwin woollybutt. And also because it's the first case we've ever seen where extra CO2 actually does seem to hurt a plant. In 1994, 9 experiments with additional CO2 saw the butt grow more woolly 6 times and less woolly in only 3. But in one of those cases, it grew less by 38%, which yielded an overall average of -2%. So, if it keeps up, there will eventually be less and less of the Darwin woollybutt to kick around. For the Climate Discussion Nexus, I'm John Robson, saying to our viewers in Poland, see you later.